I'm Don Milford. I'm a retired naval officer and ex-president of the RSL. I had 34 years total service and finished up at the rank of Lieutenant Commander. In 1961, when I joined the Navy, completed my training and joined my first warship, HMAS Quickmatch, around September of that year. It was a converted Q-class destroyer from the Second World War, ex-British Navy. Australia bought 6 of these ships and we used them during the Second World War. We're doing trials off New South Wales, off Jervis Bay, to be able to get operationally fit before we could go north to take our place on the Far East Station. Australia was committed to having 2 destroyers on the Far East Station continuously. So we did all that, got our tick of approval, and we headed north via Darwin. My first time to Darwin in 1961, we played a few games of sport against the locals, and then I posted off a letter to my family. When I asked the gentleman behind the counter at the post office, said, "Where's the effect? Can you tell me how to get into town?" And he said, "Bloody Southerners." He said, "You just don't realise, do you, when you're in heaven?" And a few other explicit words that I won't repeat. So we arrived on station in Singapore, and then we had 9 months in the Far East, which included Christmas in Hong Kong, one of 3 years in a row that I would spend Christmas in Hong Kong. Some people would pay a lot of money for that, but I got there for free. In fact, they paid me to go there. The trip involving exercises with other navies and a lot of time spent with the American forces at sea. In those days, our underwater telephones were virtually non-existent. Unless the submarine was sitting right underneath us, the submarine couldn't hear us. So we used to drop hand grenades in the water, and each number up to 6 meant different things. So we were in a storm and exercising with the submarine. And I got a telephone call from the bridge. I was on the quarterdeck and was told to drop 6 grenades. So I'm taking the grenades out, dropping them over the sides, and you're supposed to hold your hands outside of the guardrails and pull the pin out and drop it. That's all very well. 5 of them went kavoom all very nicely. The 6th one, I couldn't get the pin out. So I pulled my hands back inside the guardrails, pulled the pin out, and my hand hit the guardrail, and the grenade rolled along the deck. Now, thank God it had about a 10-second fuse, because I reckon I used 5 of them trying to work out where I was going to hide. Knowing I had people underneath the deck, and I just thought, I can't do that. I've got to go and pick it up. So I chased after this bloody thing and picked it up, got it to the side, threw it in the water. Everything's going through my mind. How many seconds is that? Is it going to go bang now and take my head off? Anyway, it went under the water, and it must have sunk about 1 metre, because the next minute it went kavoompa. And the bung out of the bottom of the grenade come whistling back over my head. And I thought, oh, Jesus, that was close. The guys on the sonar were going off their brain, because you can imagine a noise like this so close to their ears, their earphones. And So, yeah, I was abused left, right and centre, but I never told anybody what happened for 34 years. My last day in the Navy, I had a dining out night of the wardroom, the officers' mess. And I said, I have a mea culpa I have to make. And I told them the story. There was silence. The CO of Northern Territory, the Navy captain that was in charge of the Northern Territory, stood up and he said, do you know this man served through 3 decades and 3 different types of destroyers, and he served on all of them? And that broke the silence. Everybody started to giggle. But being in the Far East Station was just like being on a cruise ship. You tripped around, you played these exercises for a week or 2 and whatever, and then you'd go to port and you'd try and drink the place dry, but that didn't work. So, on Australia Day 1962, we tied up ourselves and Vampire, tied up alongside in Saigon. Australia was just about to enter the Vietnam War, and our presence in Saigon was to show the flag and to encourage the South Vietnamese to say, yes, our troops will be here and they will fight alongside of you. Yeah, so Vampire was in board of us. She had her captain was senior to us, so they got the inboard berth. I had the duty. I was duty on the first day in, and my first job was to be upper deck sentry with a Thompson submachine gun slung over my shoulder and a magazine clip in my pocket. By the time I would have got it loaded, if anybody tried to come aboard, they would have been aboard long before I got that thing loaded. Yeah. I know when you fire a Thompson submachine gun, they pull high to the right, and so you always have to start low and you sweep upwards. So yeah, interesting techniques. So my second time to the Far East was on HMAS Vampire. They used to call it the jewel of the Far East. It was just, they polished the ship's side with car polish to make the ship's side shine. It was just, and you know, it was pretty, after Second World War for a while there, it was pretty quiet. And the Vietnam War for us, hadn't really started. But being tied up in Saigon, we were picked up by a combination of SEALs from the Vietnamese forces and the American forces, taken up to their base, and they were showing us some tunnels they were blowing up, and then invited us to go into the tunnels. And so any volunteers like to go into the tunnels? So stupid me, put my hand up, said, I'll go and have a look. So off we went, crawled through these tunnels, couldn't see a bloody thing, and finally got out the other end. And we probably only crawled about, 20 metres at the most. It wasn't far. But the tunnels in those days, not like they are now, they're not built for tourists. These tunnels were built for these slightly built Vietnamese people who could squat and walk on their feet in a squat. I couldn't do that, and our guide was much faster than I was through the tunnels. And then we watched them blow the tunnels up. Man, what an explosion. Yeah. So all this was put down to good learning experiences. And I must say, in 1963, when I was on Vampire, it was good to be on a new destroyer, one that was built in Australia, because the British ships were not air conditioned and they were really hot in the tropics. And the only way you got air inside the mess decks was to put these scoops out the side of the scuttles, And that's all very well until you either made a change of course and the ship leant over, and next minute you got a wash of waves coming through your scuttle. So, yeah, so everything got really wet. But this nice new destroyer, HMAS Vampire, and I was assigned to a twin mount Bofa. Each barrel fired 120 rounds a minute. Quite a big projectile, and every fourth one was a tracer. So the sight to actually try and aim the barrel on to hit the target was pretty amateurish. So we used to fire by the tracers and trying to hit the target. Moving aircraft were hard to hit, especially if they're coming straight before you, straight in front of you. Very hard to hit. My last time there was about another 6 or 8 months we had in the Far East Station, then came home, joined HMAS Sydney, went chasing cyclones because she was going to be recommissioned as the Vong Tau Ferry. But I came home in 1965. I changed out of my previous categories and transferred to become a PDI, physical training instructor. And I did that for 18 years. So I came from a leading seaman, a corporal, up through the ranks in that category. Every ship carries at least one PDI, and they're there for not only organising sport when you're going into harbour, but also to help with the morale of the team, the ship's company, and keep them laughing and giggling, and yeah. But interesting job being a PDI, and I'm sure the juniors on board never liked us because we got them out of bed at 6 o'clock every morning to do PT, rain, hail or sunshine. And an afternoon it was quite. So I went back to sea on HMAS Parramatta, which was a frigate, another ship that was built in Australia. There were 6 of them, all named after rivers in Australia. And we went away with HMAS Vendetta to the Far East Station. Then we were assigned to be the consort for the Melbourne. So we picked the Melbourne up just north of the Sunda Straits and sailed with her wherever she was going. We were actually going up to do the Rim of the Pacific exercise with the Americans. There were 2 forces, one sailed from Subic Bay and the other one sailed from Hong Kong. We were in the force that sailed from Hong Kong. In our fleet was the USS Enterprise, and when the Melbourne cruised up alongside the Enterprise, we were all laughing because it looked like a tugboat. Here you had this 50,000 tonne aircraft carrier with about 4,000 or 5,000 men on board, and the Melbourne at about 20,000 tonnes and about 1,200 on board. So, but they were in awe when we finished the exercise in Subic. They used to say to us, how do you land planes on that little ship? So never seen anything that small landing planes on it. But yeah, Melbourne was probably one of the best ships I've ever been on. That exercise was unfortunate because the Melbourne ran over the USS Perry, Frankie Perry, and killed about 80 or 90 people, cut the ship in half. So that, and that was the second time it had run over a destroyer. So the Australian destroyer Voyager was the first one in 1964. So this was 1968. So we came, Melbourne returned to Singapore with this huge gap in its gaping hole in its bow, and then limped home, and we returned to our work on the Far East Station. The years after that, I spent a lot of time in HMAS Cerberus, where I was promoted. I was actually promoted to Petty Officer before I went there, and I went there and became an instructor and took a course of PDIs through. One time, one of the things we teach them is outward bound training. And we had this group of PDIs in the Grampian Mountains, and it was coming towards the end of their training. This day they had to climb up this mountain, then run, doing orienteering back to the base camp. And just before they got to the base camp, they had to swim across this lake. And they had a set time that they had to do it in. This group of about 4 was swimming across the lake, and one of these chaps drowned. His lung collapsed. He was there with him for 1 minute, and then he was gone. So that was a pretty sad occasion. It was a very close-knit branch in the Navy. There weren't many of us, and we all knew the families, and it was pretty sad to come back and have to then go through the funeral and all that. I don't want to talk about that anymore. It was very sad. After that, I went back on the sea on the Melbourne as a Chief Petty Officer, and I was promoted to Warrant Officer on the Melbourne. The CEO of the Melbourne at the time was eventually became Governor of New South Wales, and one night I had done my Officer of the Watch training as part of things I needed to do. And this night I was on watch on the bridge, and we were coming back from New Zealand, and the next minute there's this almighty crash on top of the bridge. So I said to the midshipman on watch, go up, find out what the communicators are doing on the bridge, that they're making that much noise, because the captain is in his sea cabin. And the midshipman comes back down and he says, Mr. Milford, he said, the Elwo aerial has fallen over the side. Now this aerial weighed a couple of tonne, and it rotated around, and it was our long-range warning radar. And it vibrations, I mean, it was pretty rough. The waves were breaking over the flight deck, but the shuttering had fractured the bolts holding it onto the ship, and thank God it fell into the water, because if it fell on the deck it would have killed the handlers that were taking shelter up close to the island. So I said, okay, put a dead reckoning now. That means we don't know where we are, we're just going to put a DR on the chart, looking at the time we're going, the course we're travelling, and this is where we think we are. And we were over a trench that was 4,000 fathoms deep. So I went and woke the captain, and Sir Warrant Officer Milford, I'm the Officer of the Watch, and he said, yes, Don. I said, sir, the Elwo aerial has fallen over. Now that's Navy slang that it's gone off the air. And I said, he said, well, don't wake me, Don. Go and wake the greenies and get it fixed. And I said, sir, I can't do that. I said, I'll start again. The Elwow aerial that used to be on top of the bridge has fallen over the side and failed the swimming test, sir. He said, again. I said, you know that big aerial you had on the roof? So you haven't got it anymore. He said, I got you. He said, go and wake the navigator. He said, go and get the bosun's mate to wake the navigator, and I will be on the bridge in 5 minutes. Yes, sir. Out we go, said to the bosun's mate, go and wake the navigator. The kid came back in about 5 minutes, and he said, sir, he told me to off. And so I said to the Osler watch, and there was another guy there, and I said to him, I'll go and wake the navigator. So I got his rubbish bin next to his ear and banging the bottom of it. And he leaps up in the air and he says, what are you bloody doing, clubs? And I said, sir, the Elwow aerial's fallen over the side. The captain's going to be on the bridge in 5 minutes and your presence is required. He said, if you're taking the piss out of me, he said, I'm going to log you. Now, to be logged as an officer of the watch, it's a really serious event. The navigator was a lieutenant commander, and him and I we both used to wear the same medal ribbons, and he was forever losing his, so he'd come and borrow mine. So, anyway, onto the bridge we go, and the navigator walks onto the bridge and he yells out the top of his voice, you're an arsehole, PDI, because the captain was sitting in his chair. So, I don't think anybody got much sleep that night, so we all had to write reports and whatever, and we all had to have them ready by 8 o'clock the next morning. So, and yeah, but exciting place. So from there, and this is the most exciting posting I have ever had in my entire 34 years. I got picked to go to the Philippines as the assistant defence attaché. And there we were. The day we flew in, my wife and I had my ex-wife and 2 children, and they assassinated the leader of the opposition as he was getting out of an aircraft. Somebody leant over and pulled the trigger. So I said to my wife, welcome to Manila. So we lived in a nice suburb. It was all self-protected, security, huge walls all the way around it, and we felt quite safe in the village. We had a huge house staff, a cook, a maid, a nanny for the children. They were all females. We had a driver and 2 security guards. So, yeah, you never got lonely at home. There were always people everywhere. My wife drove the house staff. So, Manila, we were there for the revolution, a couple of attempted coups. I've seen more firefights in that posting and got caught in more firefights than ever in the Vietnam War. I mean, I was Navy, I was, sitting off the coast somewhere, or we hardly ever got on the beach, and if we did, it was a fluke. Yeah, so the night the revolution went down, we were at a function at the ambassador's residence, all dressed up in our dress uniforms, so the defence attaché, who was an army colonel, an absolute man's man. He just loved getting his feet and hands dirty. He called us together and he said, "Would you take your wives home and be in the embassy in plain clothes, and I'll assign your duties." So we took our wives home. The other attaché that was there with me was from the Air Force. He was the Joint Intelligence Organisation operative, so he was a declared agent. These are the people that work out of embassies and other areas overseas. These are the people that are over there. ASIO is the internal security of Australia. They all work in Australia, usually only. And the other person we had was a federal police officer. So the federal police officer and us three from the defence side got on extremely well, and we used to do some of his work for him fine. If we were going away somewhere, he'd say, "Can you scout out and see if you can find this person, this boat, this whatever it was that he wanted." And the night the revolution went down, I got sent to, the Air Force guy and I got sent to Defence Headquarters for the Filipinos, and we got in to see the Minister of Defence. His name was Jaime, spelt with a J, on relay. And he had changed sides from the Marcos regime to the Aquino regime. And it took us ages to get in, it took us ages to get to speak to him, and it took us ages to get out again. You can imagine a citadel surrounded by his own private army. Being the Minister of Defence, he had a 200-man private army, and they were all paid by the government, of course, but they were his soldiers. They were there to protect him. The fallout from all of that was we did get to speak to him, and the words we uttered were, "Sir, as you know, our ambassador is being recalled after the alleged allegations of cheating in the last elections by the Marcos regime. Is there any, he leaves tomorrow morning, flies out tomorrow morning, is there any words that you would like him to take back to Australia?" And he said, "Yes, gentlemen," he said, "next Tuesday," he said, "Corey Aquino will declare a revolutionary government. We would be eternally grateful if Australia would recognise that government." The revolution went down and Aquino declared a revolutionary government, and Australia was the second nation in the world to recognise that government. So if I asked you a question, those people out there, who was the first? So to put your minds at rest, it was the French. The US was the last nation to recognise, because they were trying to get Marcos out of the country before he was killed. So the revolution went for about 5 days, maybe 7. It was an extremely long time. My colleague from the Air Force and I were sent to Quezon City, which is a city, part of Metro Manila, which is a huge population, 20-odd thousand people, million people. And Quezon City was up in the mountains where all the TV stations, their transmitting channels are. Marcos still controlled one of those channels. So David and I were assigned to go to that channel and find out how many rangers these special troops were that were guarding them, and if the opposition forces had surrounded it. So it was slightly down a hill. We lost radio contact because we had line of sight radios. We lost contact with the embassy. And we're looking through this chain wire fence mess. And I'm counting these guys up in the tower, and the next minute the door bursts open and there's whack, whack, whack. I said, come on, Dave, let's get out of here. So we're trudging back up the hill on the Shanks's pony, and I'm looking at the guys in the tower so they don't take a pot shot at us. And on the way back we got radio service again, and David's at the radio and he's saying to the boss, this is what happened, and the boss said, well, how far are you from the firefight? And David said to me, what do you reckon? I said, about 80 metres. And the boss said, you're that far away? And I went, I said, tell the boss I'm a sailor. Over the horizon warfare. I don't need to see the whites of their eyes. David got there, he said, sir, my naval colleague wishes to bring to your attention wobbly wop. He said, no, I'd like to remind you that I do it at Mach 2. He said, yeah. But David had crashed out of an F-111 upside down and he couldn't fly anymore. So playing golf with David is like watching a broomstick bend over, you know. He's a stiff ball bucker, you know. So he used to give me the ball and tee and say, can you put that in the ground for me? A few days later, at Malacanang is the palace where the president lives, and it's down in Umita and backs onto the river. And the forces the people were trying to swarm the revolutionaries, were trying to swarm the palace. The police, so in the Philippines there are two different types of police force. There's the PC, they're a military arm, all right? So they're just like soldiers. And then there's the integrated national police, which is sort of a version like we would recognise in our police force, but little capabilities. And they, a group, were protecting the palace. The boss and David were away somewhere, I can't remember. So I thought, I'll go down and write a report for the ambassador. We had a new ambassador by this time. And so I went down there and I'm standing beside this young PC officer who I had sent to Australia to do some training, management training. And we were chatting away, and the next minute somebody said, the people started to charge the line. So the police were shooting into the ground. They never shot at them, but they were shooting into the ground. But of course the bullets would ricochet, come up. And I seen this Chinese woman who was a press agent get hit, and she went down. Just a flesh wound, but she went down and it was painful. So I just said to this young PC officer, I know that woman. I'd like to go and get her back to safety. He said, yeah, okay. So he told his men to stop fire. And I went out, picked her up, brought her back, and then took her to a hospital. Nice. Yeah. And she came to the embassy and thanked my boss for me doing something. But it was, anybody would have done it. You know, if you know somebody out there and they're in trouble, you would go and get them. And because I knew this PC officer, I didn't feel he would pull the trigger on me. So that's 3 occasions when we enjoyed our time. Yeah, it was just so exciting. and every day was just a new challenge. So I came home as a lieutenant and posted to HMAS Watson. I had 12 months there, and then the end of the bicentenary in '88, I came back to Cerberus and I became the sports officer. So there were 3,000 trainees, 3,000 people under training, all right, maybe 2,000 under training, and I was to organise all the sporting competitions. I did that for, I think, 2 years, and then at 38-year-old, the problem when you're a PDI, you have to be so fit. And the trainees stay the same age every year. You're not the same trainees, but they stay the same age. And keeping up with them is hard work, because as you get older, all your injuries gradually take the toll. They wanted to, after 3 years, they wanted to post me to Canberra to train the new recruiting staff. And I said, I'm not going to Canberra, it's too cold. I'll go north of the 24th parallel. So the 24th parallel runs through Rockhampton roundaboutish. And so this recruiting officer said to me, they said, we only got one for a lieutenant commander. And they said, that's in Darwin as the staff officer for, Navy staff officer for Kangaroo 89. So I'll have that. And they gave it to me. So, but because I was a seaman officer and not a principal warfare officer, they were a bit reluctant to do it. But we got through, and we got through the exercise with flying colours. I got another commendation and all the rest of it. In '73, I think it was, I got a medal for conspicuous service. I was at the Apprentices College, and the new CEO when I had just arrived, and he said, I want to stop the apprentices from, we call it jumping ship, from jumping over the fence and going AWOL. He said, what can we do, Don? I said, make them that tired that they don't want to jump the fence. The fence is too high. I said, that's going to be a huge strain on the staff of Narimba overall. I said, because the PDIs just couldn't do it by themselves. So we used to have 6 o'clock PT every morning on the airfield, because and they ranged between 600 and 900 trainees, all young strappers. They'd come in and they'd be shorter than me, but by the time they left, they towered over me, so I used to have to stand on top of the 2 steps, look down at it. But yeah, so it was, but another great job. I enjoyed Narimba, it was a fantastic job. So I left the branch and became the recruiting officer for Far North Queensland. Well, what a top job that was. We had an AO from Thursday Island, west to Mount Isa and south to Mareeba, just near Mackay. And I had 3 staff, and one of them was my assistant, female, and all credit to all the RANs that worked for us in those days. They were so efficient, really good stuff, you know, good people. The chief was a character. I had a couple of chiefs. They were characters. But we came up with better numbers than even some of the bigger states that joined the Navy. So we obviously were doing a good job. I had two responsibilities. One was to be the staff officer and for the exercise. The other was to be the liaison officer with the Reserve Port Division, which had about, varied between about 40 and 60 people, all of different categories, who had left the Navy and become reservists. So some of them were, a lot were radio operators that were, there's a bracket in, so they were radio operators brackets S. Now that means that they were linguists, and being linguists, the language they learnt in the majority was Indonesian, so they could interrogate the fishing trawlers that were coming in and out of our waters. And but they have a big base here in Darwin that they use to do all that as well. My first wife and I split up in year 2000. I think the constant time I was away, I left the Navy in 1991, maybe 92, the permanent Navy, and then transferred over to the reserve. But then I got a job with Paspaley Pearls as manager of their property company, which was in those days, by some standards, huge, by their standards, smidgely. Had the portfolio was probably worth in the vicinity of $300,000. And when I left 11 years later, I was having a heart attack. It was worth in the millions and millions of dollars, spread all around the world. And they bought out a company called Pearls Proprietary Limited, which was the biggest pearling company in Australia, and became the biggest pearling company, not only in Australia, but probably worldwide. And they are just so diversified. They have aircraft, they have ships, they have land holdings that would blow your brain. So it was a fantastic job, but once again, I was never home. I was always tripping somewhere. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But it was an exciting life, and I told my wife when I turned 70 that if I live till I'm 90, I'll be the oldest living Milford of my family. And she said, yeah. I said, but if I do live till I'm 90, that's 1,040 weekends you have to put up with me. She said, God, Christ. So having just, October last year, I turned 77. She was quick to remind me there's only now 670, I think, weekends to go. I had a huge heart attack in 1999, which resulted in a triple bypass. And recently I've had my throat cut to clear a blockage out of my carotid artery, 90% blocked. And 2 weeks ago they put a pacemaker in me. So I've come to the conclusion, if you've got blockages in your heart or veins or arteries, you need a good plumber. If you've got any problems with the electrics, you need a good electrician. And Darwin now has some of the best surgeons and best electricians and the best, they are just phenomenal. This latest attachment, they said the battery will last 10 years. I said, well, that's not long enough. I said, it only takes me to 87. And they said, well, you have to come back and get another one. I said, octogenarians are okay to put a pacemaker in? They said, oh, well, we'll put them in at any age. So it's good to be able to laugh at life and be able to. One of my jobs as president of the RSL was to sit on the selection committee of the students that we sent to France. We, the Northern Territory government, sent to France every year for Anzac Day. And seeing some of the talent that come through that selection process was just simply amazing. They used to astound me, some of these kids, their knowledge and that. The question I always ask them, what's the significance of Phyllis Brettner to Australia? Now, I don't know if you know the significance, but on the 24th of April 1918, the Germans overrun Phyllis Brettner. The village of Phyllis Brettner was about 20 k's from Amiens. Amiens was a big centre, well, it was a city, and it's was the centre where all the rail tracks came in, and the Germans wanted it because then they could speed up the spread of their troops through the western side of Europe. My wife and I were in Europe in 2017, and we rode one of the fast trains from Ypres in Belgium to back to Paris, 300 kilometres an hour. This train was travelling, and everything's just going past you in a flash. So the significance of Phyllis Brettner, was under the Australian and New Zealand control. They were responsible for the village. The British had defended it for quite a few years, up till 14 to 15, when the Australians arrived on theatre. And we lost. The Germans kicked the Aussies out that night, and but the general in charge of the forces, Pompey Elliott, put 2 brigades, one south, one north, and at 10 o'clock at night they retook Phyllis Brettner. They lost 1,200 men. And their names all appear either on the wall at the Australian War Memorial in Phyllis Brettner or on tombstones. As they find more bodies and they identify the bodies, they take the names off the wall and put them on the tombstones. We were there on Remembrance Day 2017. In Ypres, in Belgium, at the Menin Gate. The Menin Gate is where all the troops used to march through to board the trains that would take them to the Western Front. The Menin Gate is a memorial to all those that lost their lives in Belgium and France, that entered the war through the Menin Gate. It's all made of this beautiful stone, and all the names are engraved in this gorgeous stone. Every night, the Belgians commemorate the fall of the troops by saying the Ode of Remembrance at 8 o'clock every night. We were there for about 4 days, and on this Wednesday night I got to say the Ode of Remembrance at the Menin Gate in front of 8,000 people. Now that's not the biggest crowd I've ever said the ode to, but it was pretty significant doing it in Belgium on this particular night. I was just so proud. Well, if you want to be successful, you've got to be able to plan ahead. So the services always taught us the 6 Ps. Prior planning prevents piss poor performance, and you've got to be able to do that. But you need to have the trust of the people around you. You need to be reliable, somebody that they can rely on to do that your job and more than your job. You've got to be the one that stands out. Never be anything other than humble. It's great to be able to tell stories, and it's wonderful to think that someone in the future might see this story and take something away from it. So always be humble. And most of all, when you have a family, look after the family. Our family has now grown. We now have 4 sons and 1 daughter. When I lived in the Philippines, my wife and I were told that if we had any more children, we had 2 boys, both blonde, in a world of dark-haired people, dark-haired, dark-skinned. Anyway, the bottom line of all of that, we adopted a little 9-month-old girl. She's now 35. She's still Daddy's little chocolate frog. And she's got her own daughter now, and she's married. She's an accountant. She has been so successful, and I'm very, very proud of her. So I've asked her if she wants to go back and find her birth parents. She said, no, you're my parents. Yeah. So, but she's an absolute delight. All the boys are good, and they all spoil her rotten, and so we have one boy who's one of Annie's sons is a chef in Perth, married with one of our grandchildren. We have another son that works for the Darwin City Council, has done that forever. So another son who is a pest exterminator, and another son who is lives in Gladstone, and him and his partner are coming home for Christmas, so that'll be great. So it's, but yeah, when you get a family, look after them, protect them.